Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India has landed in Johannesburg for the all-important Brics summit, and all eyes are now on whether he will hold talks with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, this in a bid to resolve the three-year-old standoff at the line of actual control. Ever since the clashes between Indian and Chinese troops in Galwan in 2020, there have been talks between foreign ministers, defense ministers, even NSA level officials of both countries have met. So much so, military officials from both sides have held several rounds of talks, but Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping have never spoken since the clash at Galwan. In September 2022, the two leaders stood next to each other when they attended a leaders' lunch at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Samarkand. In November 2022, Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping were seen talking at a G20 banquet in Bali. Prime Minister Modi walked up to Xi Jinping and exchanged greetings. It was only in July this year that the Ministry of External Affairs admitted that both leaders had discussed boundary issues. And since the talks began after the Galwan incident, there has been disengagement from 6 friction points. And namely, they are Galwan, the north and south banks of Pangong So, at patrolling point 17 in the Gogra Hot Springs, even patrolling point 15. But the Demchok plains and Demchok continue to be a sticking point between both countries. Both sides have issues regarding troop positions, especially at the bottleneck on the eastern edge of Depsang. What's clear is that both sides would want a resolution to this issue, which is now in its 3rd year. But the outcome will depend on the extent of the willingness of both the leaders to find common ground. And apart from the LAC being an issue, a bilateral between India and China will also be important in resolving these issues over the G20 joint declaration statement as well. Remember, both China and Russia are blocking it at present, and the summit is only less than 3 weeks away. So what will be the outcome of the India-China meet if one does happen at the Brics is something we'll in fact delve deep into. And for that, let me introduce my guest today. I'm joined in by China geostrategist Einar Tangen. Many thanks to you, Mr. Tangen, for joining in. Let's talk about the timing first, considering the war or the impact on global economy and supply chains. Can the geopolitical developments of the past year or the challenges now being faced by the United Nations give a new lease of life to Brics?
Well, let's define what the Brics is. It's a middle power grouping. It is reshaping global geopolitical and economic landscape. Its GDP is larger than the G7, and it brings a combination of resources, production, and markets. So it represents the multipolar reality. It provides a consensus versus corporate model of governmental development globally. So at this juncture, it's not the UN that's failing. It is those countries who are undermining the UN, undermining the WTO, that have pushed countries to find alternatives. It's the tech wars. It's the physical kinetic wars that are out there. People are looking, especially in the global south, for a vision of prosperity, predictability, which is not being provided by the usual sources, the G7.
Right. Mr. Tangen, with regards to a probable meeting between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi, is LAC now becoming the biggest test of diplomacy for India and China?
Well, that's how India defines it. India has been very clear that the border situation is the defining issue. So based on the prior, what appears to be instructions by both leaders at the Bali conference, that they come together and reach some sort of consensus or development, the numerous meetings that have gone on. Unfortunately, the last military-to-military meeting, which lasted unusually for 2 days, did not seem to garner a consensus. So it's not clear. But I can tell you what is clear. The disputes between China and India will not be settled militarily. This is an issue about security. It will be settled diplomatically. And as soon as people realize that and come to the table in good faith, I think there can be a global settlement, not just about what area of land is controlled where, but where there should be a mutually agreeable border so that both countries can get on about their business.
All right. Also, Mr. Tangen, is BRICS now becoming a test for India's multipolarity rhetoric? Because remember, that's how India has been weaving the narrative that it's no longer a non-aligned nation. In fact, it is one country that believes in multipolarity, and that is how it's been sort of walking the diplomatic tightrope. Can India balance between a China-centric and a West-centric world order?
China is a sovereign nation. It can do as it pleases. In terms of the BRICS, it has already signaled that it is in favor of more members. The real question at this juncture, not only for India, but China, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil, is how to organize that. The strength of this grouping is because they are middle powers. But if they, in fact, open the floodgates, what they're going to have is developing countries asking for solutions that they are not in a position to give. And that's where I say it's a bit of a trap. You have the G7 sitting quietly, as you'll note, not saying anything about the BRICS grouping, but sitting there with all the money they made from plundering the global south, including India. Remember, India was 24% of the world's GDP before the British came. After they left, it was 4%. So, at these points in time are kind of inflection points. It's important that the BRICS act strategically it's not just about conserving their power, but making sure that they can bring the G7 countries who profited to the table and make them disgorge many of the profits that they have. For instance, the $100 billion a year that was supposed to go to developing countries to help them mitigate climate change, only 1/10 has actually appeared. And of that 1/10, it seems to be just projects which are related to the profits of developed countries. So, at this juncture, the global south, as represented by these middle powers, the BRICS, could be very influential in making the rest of the world, and the G7, I mean, the developed countries, come to the table and do what they should have done by themselves, which is contribute to the mess that they've made.
All right. Mr. Tangen, to end with, we all know that the Russian president will not be attending the summit in person. Instead, he'll be joining it via a video call. Can the BRICS still hope to go ahead with its plans of de-dollarization?
Well, you can have all the plans you want, but I can tell you right now that the infrastructure that is necessary to de-dollarize, to have a BRICS currency, is not there. It'll take a couple of years to develop. The idea is there. You see countries doing currency swaps, engaging in activities which are trying to hedge against the US dollar. That will continue. But a full-blown currency is something that is a little ways down the line. And all the discussion, while good, planning is important, it's not going to yield something that's going to be effective in the next 3 months.